I stood on what I'd always believed was my property, watching a middle-aged woman with a clipboard march toward me with the fury of someone who'd just discovered their neighbor's fence was 3 inches over the property line. The morning sun glinted off Lake Michigan's waters behind me, and I could already tell this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You need to remove that dock immediately. This is common area property belonging to the Shoreline Estates Homeowners Association." I turned to face her fully, taking in her crisp white blouse, pressed khaki pants, and perfectly coiffed blonde hair that hadn't moved despite the breeze coming off the lake. Her name tag read Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. Of course it did. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, genuinely confused. "This is my property. I'm Xavier Patterson. I own the house at 2847 Lakeshore Drive, and this parcel came with it when I bought the place 6 months ago." Brenda's lips pursed into a thin line. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Patterson. According to our HOA documents, this lakefront parcel has been designated as common area since the subdivision was established. You have no right to install private docks or any other structures here." I felt my jaw clench. I'd spent the last 3 weeks planning this dock, getting permits from the county, hiring contractors. The materials were being delivered tomorrow. "That's impossible. My deed clearly includes this land. It's described in the property boundaries." "Your deed is incorrect then," she said with the smug certainty of someone who'd never been wrong in their life. "I have the HOA covenants right here, and they're very clear. This land belongs to all residents of Shoreline Estates to enjoy equally. Your private dock would be an encroachment on community property." I looked past her at the lakefront parcel in question. It was a strip of land about 50 feet wide and 100 feet deep, running from the road down to the water. It sat directly adjacent to my main property, separated only by an old survey marker. When I'd bought my house, the realtor had made a big deal about how rare it was to have actual lakefront access in this neighborhood, since most of the shore was indeed common area. That's why I'd paid an extra $150,000 for this place. "Brenda, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I reviewed all the HOA documents before I bought this house. There was nothing about this parcel being common area." "Then you didn't review them carefully enough," she snapped. "I've been president of this HOA for 8 years, and I know these bylaws inside and out. That land is common area, period. If you don't remove your survey stakes by the end of the week, we'll be forced to take legal action." She turned on her heel and walked away before I could respond, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the stakes marking where my dock was supposed to go, feeling my blood pressure rising. I'd moved to Michigan from Chicago specifically for this property. After 20 years working as an architect, I'd finally saved enough to buy my dream house, a 1940s Craftsman with actual water access. My ex-wife had gotten the condo in the divorce, and I'd wanted something completely different, somewhere I could kayak in the mornings and watch the sunset over the water in the evenings. This lakefront parcel was literally the entire reason I'd bought this house instead of any of the other dozen properties I'd looked at. I pulled out my phone and called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen. He'd handled the closing on my house and had been thorough to a fault. If there was an issue with the property boundaries, he would have caught it. "Xavier, good to hear from you," Marcus answered on the second ring. "How's the new place?" "Been better," I said. "I just had the HOA president tell me that my lakefront parcel is actually common area and I can't build my dock." There was a pause. "That's not possible. I personally reviewed the deed description and the plat map. That parcel is definitely included in your property." That's what I thought. But she's insisting the HOA covenants designated as common area. "Let me pull up your file," Marcus said. I heard typing in the background. "Okay, I'm looking at the deed right now. The legal description specifically includes parcel 14B as shown on the amended plat of Shoreline Estates, recorded in Liber 892, page 2 and 47. That's your lakefront access. It's absolutely part of your property. So what do I do? First, don't remove those survey stakes. Second, I need you to get a copy of whatever HOA documents this woman is referencing. If she's claiming the covenants say something different from what's in the recorded deed, we need to see exactly what she's basing that on. The deed is the ultimate authority on property ownership, but we need to understand what she thinks she has." I thanked Marcus and hung up, then headed back to my house. The Craftsman sat about 200 feet back from the lake, its cedar shingles weathered to a perfect silver gray. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I'd seen it, with its exposed beams, stone fireplace, and walls of windows facing the water. The previous owner had been an elderly woman named Dorothy Kimball, who'd lived here since 1965. She'd moved to assisted living, and her kids had sold the place to settle her estate. I spent the rest of the morning digging through my closing documents, looking for anything related to HOA covenants or restrictions. I found the basic bylaws, which covered typical stuff like no commercial vehicles parked on the street, no above-ground pools, keep your lawn maintained, nothing about my lakefront parcel being restricted. At noon, I drove to the county recorder's office in St. Joseph. If Brenda wanted to play the documentation game, I'd play it better. I'd spent 2 decades reading property surveys and zoning regulations for my architectural work. I knew how to research this stuff. The recorder's office was in a brick building downtown, with that particular smell all government offices seem to have, a mix of old paper and industrial cleaner. A clerk named Janet helped me access the property records for Shoreline Estates. We started with my current deed, which matched exactly what Marcus had described. What I really need, I told Janet, is the original plat for this subdivision. When was it established? She typed on her computer. Shoreline Estates was platted in 1952, but there are some earlier records too. Looks like there was a previous plat from 1937 for some of this land. Can I see both? Janet printed them out along with several amendments that had been recorded over the years. I spread them across one of the research tables and started comparing them. The 1952 plat showed Shoreline Estates as a typical post-war suburban development, curving streets with modest lots, several parcels marked as common area along the lakefront. But my parcel, the one Brenda claimed was common area, wasn't on this plat at all. I looked at the 1937 document, which was older and harder to read. It showed a completely different layout, larger estate-sized lots from an earlier era. And there, clearly marked, was a parcel labeled Lot 7 Lakeshore Estates with boundaries that matched my current property exactly. Janet, can you help me understand this? I asked. It looks like my property predates the 1952 subdivision. She studied the documents. That's not uncommon. Sometimes when developers create new subdivisions, there are existing lots that don't get included. Those lots retain their original deeds and boundaries. So my property would be governed by the 1937 plat, not the 1952 one. That would be my understanding, but I'm not an attorney. You should definitely verify with a lawyer. I photographed every page of the 1937 plat and the chain of title documents showing how the property had passed from owner to owner over the decades. The original deed was from a man named Edward Pritchard, who'd built several lakefront estates during the Depression era. My house was one of only 3 from that original development that still existed. Back in my car, I called Marcus again. I think I found something. My property predates the HOA subdivision by 15 years. Hold on, what? I explained what I'd discovered. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his legal mind. Xavier, if that's accurate, this changes everything. Your property would have been grandfathered in when the subdivision was created. The HOA covenants wouldn't apply to your lakefront parcel at all because it wasn't part of the 1952 development. So Brenda is wrong? Brenda is very wrong, but we need to document this thoroughly. Can you email me those photos? I sent them from my phone while we were still talking. Marcus was silent for several minutes as he reviewed them. This is solid, he finally said. Your parcel was Lot 7 of the original Lakeshore Estates. When the rest of the land was redeveloped in 1952, this lot wasn't included. It maintained its original boundaries. The HOA has no jurisdiction over it, so what now? Now we respond to the HOA formally with documentation. They made a demand. We'll show them why that demand is baseless. If they continue to insist, we'll file a quiet title action to settle the matter in court once and for all. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thanks, Marcus. Thank you for doing the research. Most clients wouldn't have thought to check the historical records. Your architecture background is coming in handy. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer, looking out at the disputed parcel of land. The sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I'd bought this place to find peace after a difficult divorce, not to fight with some power-hungry HOA president. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Patterson, this is Brenda Whitmore. The HOA board will be meeting Thursday evening at 7 p.m. to discuss your violation of community covenants. Your attendance is mandatory. I typed back. I'll be there. and I'll be bringing documentation proving that my property is not subject to your covenants." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response came the next morning. I met with Marcus at his office in downtown St. Joseph. He'd prepared a formal response to the HOA, complete with copies of the 1937 plat, the chain of title, and a legal opinion explaining why my property was exempt from their jurisdiction. "The key point," Marcus explained, tapping the documents, "is that your lot was never part of Shoreline Estates subdivision. It's a separate legal parcel that happens to be surrounded by the subdivision. The HOA has no more right to control your lakefront than they do to control any other private property in the county." "Will they accept that?" Marcus shrugged. "Depends on how reasonable they are. Some HOAs will back down when presented with clear evidence. Others will fight just because they don't like being wrong. From what you've told me about this Brenda person, I'm guessing she's the latter type. So we should prepare for a fight? We should prepare for the possibility. But let's see what happens Thursday night first." I spent the next 2 days doing more research. I found old newspaper articles about the original Lakeshore Estates development from the 1930s, photographs of the houses, even an interview with Edward Pritchard talking about his vision for gracious lakeside living. I printed everything and organized it in a binder. Thursday evening came quickly. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland modern building near the subdivision entrance. I arrived at 6:50, and the parking lot was already half full. Apparently this was going to be well attended. Inside, about 30 people sat in folding chairs facing a long table where Brenda and 4 other board members were arranged. Brenda sat in the center, flanked by 2 men and 2 women who all appeared to be in their 50s or 60s. Name placards identified them as Dennis Morrison, Vice President, Carol Hendricks, Secretary, Timothy Walsh, Treasurer, and Linda Garrison, Member at Large. I took a seat in the 3rd row. Several neighbors turned to look at me, whispering. I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood but hadn't really gotten to know anyone yet. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. She went through standard business first: approval of last month's minutes, financial report, discussion of landscaping contracts for the common areas. I waited, my binder on my lap. Finally, she reached the agenda item I was waiting for. "New business, we have a violation to address. Mr. Xavier Patterson has erected survey stakes on common area property in preparation for unauthorized construction." "That's not accurate," I said, standing up. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "You'll have a chance to speak, Mr. Patterson. Please sit down." "With respect, Brenda, if you're going to make false claims about my property, I'm going to correct them immediately." A murmur went through the room. Dennis, the vice president, leaned over to whisper something to Brenda. She shook her head. "Mr. Patterson, the covenants for this subdivision clearly state that all lakefront parcels are common area. You don't have the right to appropriate that land for private use." I walked up to the front, holding my binder. "May I present evidence?" "This isn't a court of law," Brenda said. "No, but it is a meeting where you're making claims about property ownership. I have documentation that proves those claims are incorrect." Timothy, the treasurer, spoke up. "I think we should let him present his information, Brenda. We want to be fair about this." Brenda looked like she'd bitten into a lemon, but she nodded curtly. "Fine, 5 minutes." I opened my binder and pulled out copies of the 1937 plat. This is the original plat for Lakeshore Estates, recorded in 1937. As you can see, my property was designated as Lot 7, and it included the lakefront parcel we're discussing tonight. I passed copies to the board members. Brenda barely glanced at hers. In 1952, 20 years after that grocery store plat, the Shoreline Estates subdivision was created on surrounding land. But my lot was never included in that subdivision. It maintained its original boundaries from the 1937 plat. I pulled out the chain of title documents next. Here's the complete chain of ownership from 1937 to present. Every deed describes the same parcel, including the lakefront access. When I bought this property 6 months ago, I purchased Lot 7 of the original Lakeshore Estates, not a lot in your subdivision. Carol, the secretary, was actually reading the documents. This does appear to show that Mr. Patterson's property predates our subdivision. That's irrelevant, Brenda said. He's still part of our HOA. He pays dues, doesn't he? I do, I admitted, because my house sits within the physical boundaries of your neighborhood, and I use some of the common amenities like the roads and the community entrance. But that doesn't mean you have jurisdiction over a parcel that was never part of your subdivision. I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a side-by-side comparison of the 1937 plat and the 1952 plat, with my parcel highlighted. As you can see, when Shoreline Estates was platted, there's a gap in the lots right where my property sits. That's because my property already existed and wasn't included in the new development. Dennis was studying the documents now too. Brenda, I think he might be right about this. He's not right, she insisted. We've treated that land as common area for decades, have you? I asked. Because when I researched the property history, I found tax records showing that the lakefront parcel has always been taxed as part of Lot 7, not as common area. If it were truly HOA property, it wouldn't be on anyone's individual tax bill. Timothy flipped through his copy of the documents. Do we have any records showing when or how the HOA acquired this land? Brenda's face was turning red. It's in the original covenants. I've read your covenants, I said. They define common areas as those parcels designated on the recorded plat of Shoreline Estates subdivision. My parcel isn't on that plat, so it can't be common area under your own rules. The room had gone very quiet. Other residents were leaning forward, trying to see the documents being passed around the board table. Linda, the member at large, spoke for the first time. Mr. Patterson, if what you're saying is true, why has no one raised this issue before? The previous owner lived there for decades. Dorothy Kimball was 87 when she moved out, I said. According to her kids, she hadn't been down to the lakefront in years. She didn't need dock access, so she never tried to build anything that would have triggered this dispute. But the land was always part of her property. She paid taxes on it every year. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. This is absurd. We're not going to let one resident carve up our common areas for private use just because he found some old piece of paper. That old piece of paper is a recorded deed, I said. It's a legal document that establishes property ownership. It takes precedence over your HOA covenants. We'll see it about that, Brenda snapped. I move that we retain an attorney to pursue this matter and seek an injunction preventing any construction on the disputed parcel. Second, said Dennis, though he looked uncertain. All in favor? Brenda asked. 3 hands went up. Brenda's, Dennis's, and Linda's. Carol and Timothy abstained. Motion carries, Brenda announced. Mr. Patterson, you are hereby ordered to cease any and all activities on the disputed property until this matter is resolved. That's not how property rights work, I said. You can't just order me off my own land. We'll let the courts decide whose land it is, Brenda said. I gathered my documents and returned to my seat, frustrated but not surprised. Marcus had warned me this might happen. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me. A younger couple introduced themselves as Mike and Jennifer Torres. That was impressive, Mike said. We've been dealing with Brenda's power trip since we moved in 3 years ago. It's nice to see someone stand up to her. I'm not trying to cause trouble, I said. I just want to use the property I legally own. She's been trying to expand the HOA's control for years, Jennifer said quietly. Last year she tried to tell us we couldn't paint our house blue because it wasn't on the approved color list. We had to threaten legal action before she backed down. An older man joined us. Jim Kowalski, he said, shaking my hand. I've lived here since 1968. I remember when they built most of these houses. Your place was already there, standing by itself. We all knew it wasn't really part of the subdivision. Did Dorothy ever have problems with the HOA? I asked. Jim shook his head. Dorothy kept to herself. Never made waves. Brenda probably assumed she could bully you the same way. She doesn't like being challenged. I thanked them and headed home, mentally preparing for what I knew was coming next. A legal battle, sure enough. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Grand Rapids. The HOA was filing suit, seeking a declaratory judgment that my lakefront parcel was common area property and requesting a preliminary injunction to stop my dock construction. Marcus filed our response, including all the historical documentation and a counterclaim for a quiet title action to permanently establish my ownership. He also requested attorney's fees, arguing that the HOA's claim was frivolous. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for mid-June in Berrien County Circuit Court. I spent the weeks leading up to it working with Marcus to prepare our case. He brought in a surveyor who confirmed that my property boundaries matched the 1937 plat. We also hired a title insurance expert to testify about the chain of ownership. The HOA's attorney was a stern woman named Patricia Drummond who specialized in community association law. In her brief, she argued that regardless of the historical ownership, the HOA had established adverse possession of the lakefront parcel through decades of treating it as common area. That's a weak argument, Marcus told me. Adverse possession requires open, notorious, continuous use that's hostile to the true owner's rights. But the HOA never actually used this specific parcel. They didn't build anything on it or maintain it. They just assumed it was theirs. The hearing took place on a humid Tuesday morning. Judge Robert Castellano presided, a no-nonsense man in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. Patricia Drummond went first, presenting the HOA's case. She showed the court the 1952 plat and the HOA covenants, arguing that all lakefront property in Shoreline Estates was designated as common area. The HOA has maintained and managed lakefront access for over 70 years, she said. All residents have enjoyed these common areas as part of the community amenities they pay for through their HOA dues. To now allow Mr. Patterson to privatize a portion of that lakefront would be fundamentally unfair to other residents. Judge Castellano listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When it was our turn, Marcus methodically laid out the history. He showed how my property predated the subdivision, how it had never been included in the 1952 plat, how every deed in the chain of title included the lakefront parcel. Your Honor, this is not a case of Mr. Patterson trying to take something from the HOA, Marcus said. This is a case of the HOA trying to take something from Mr. Patterson. His property rights are clearly established in the public record. The HOA's assumption that they controlled this land doesn't make it true. Our surveyor testified next, walking through the property boundaries and confirming that the lakefront parcel was within my legally described property. The title insurance expert explained how the chain of title worked and why my deed was valid. Patricia cross-examined both witnesses but couldn't shake their testimony. The facts were the facts. Finally, Judge Castellano addressed the adverse possession claim. Ms. Drummond, what specific actions did the HOA take that would constitute adverse possession of this parcel? Patricia hesitated. The HOA treated it as common area, Your Honor. It was available for all residents to use. But did they actually use it? Did they build anything on it? Maintain it? Put up signs? Fence it? Well, no. And was the previous owner, Mrs. Kimball, prevented from accessing it? I don't believe so, but then I don't see how this rises to the level of adverse possession, Judge Castellano said. The HOA simply assumed the land was theirs without taking any definitive action or excluding the true owner. That's not sufficient under Michigan law. He flipped through the documents in front of him. I've reviewed the plats, the deeds, and the chain of title. It's clear to me that the parcel in question was never part of the Shoreline Estates subdivision. Mr. Patterson's property predates the subdivision by 15 years and maintained its original boundaries. The HOA's covenants don't apply to land that wasn't included in their subdivision. I felt relief wash over me. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. Therefore, Judge Castellano continued, the request for a preliminary injunction is denied. Mr. Patterson is free to proceed with his dock construction. We'll set a trial date for the quiet title action, but frankly, unless the HOA can present some evidence we haven't seen today, I'd recommend they consider dismissing their claim. Patricia's face was tight. Your Honor, the HOA board will need to discuss this. I'm sure they will, but in the meantime, Mr. Patterson's property rights are established. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Marcus and I stood in the summer sunshine, both grinning. That went about as well as it could have, Marcus said. Judge Castellano clearly saw through their argument. So I can build my dock? You can build your dock. And if they're smart, they'll drop the lawsuit entirely. But we'll keep preparing for trial just in case. I called my contractor from the parking lot and told him to proceed with the dock construction. After weeks of stress and uncertainty, I was finally going to get what I'd paid for, private access to Lake Michigan. The dock went up over the next 2 weeks. It was a beautiful structure, built from treated lumber with a composite deck, extending about 40 feet into the water. I had a boat lift installed for the kayak I'd bought but hadn't been able to use yet. Brenda drove past my house several times while the construction was happening, slowing down to glare but never stopping. Other neighbors came by to check out the progress. Mike and Jennifer brought me a 6-pack of local craft beer. This is great, Mike said, admiring the dock. Makes me wish our lot had water access. If you ever want to use it, let me know, I offered. I don't mind sharing with friends. The response from other residents was overwhelmingly positive. Apparently, Brenda's controlling behavior had alienated a lot of people, and they were happy to see her lose a battle. But Brenda wasn't done. A week after my doc was completed, I received another letter from Patricia Drummond. The HOA was continuing with the lawsuit, demanding a trial. "They're going to fight this all the way," I told Marcus on the phone. "Let them," he said. "We'll win at trial just like we won at the hearing, and we're asking for attorney's fees, remember. If they lose, they'll have to pay both their lawyers and ours. That should be a strong incentive to settle." The trial was scheduled for September. Summer passed in a blur of kayaking, swimming, and watching spectacular sunsets from my new dock. I'd found the peace I'd been looking for when I bought this place. Despite the ongoing legal drama, in late August, something unexpected happened. I was at the community center dropping off my HOA dues check when I ran into Carol, the HOA secretary. She looked uncomfortable. "Xavier, can we talk privately?" she asked. We stepped outside, away from the office. Carol glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I wanted you to know that 3 of us on the board, me, Timothy, and a couple others, have been reviewing the bylaws and the situation with your property. We think Brenda is wrong, and we think the HOA should drop the lawsuit." "That's good to hear," I said carefully. "What's stopping you?" "Brenda won't listen. She's convinced that if we back down, it will set a precedent that undermines the HOA's authority. She's turned this into a personal crusade." "What about the rest of the board?" Carol sighed. "Dennis usually goes along with whatever Brenda wants. Linda too. The vote is 3-2 against dropping it, but there's an election coming up in November. If you can hold out until then, I think we can get some new board members who will see reason." "I appreciate you telling me this," I said, "but I'm not backing down. That's my property, and the law is on my side." "I know. I just wanted you to understand that not all of us agree with how this is being handled. Brenda doesn't speak for the whole board, even if she acts like she does." The trial began on a crisp September morning. The courthouse was busier this time, with several HOA residents sitting in the gallery. I recognized Jim Kowalski, the Taurus couple, and a few others who'd expressed support. Brenda sat behind the HOA's attorney table, her expression grim. I wondered how much money the HOA was spending on this lawsuit. Patricia Drummond didn't come cheap. Judge Castellano took the bench, and we proceeded through opening statements. Patricia's strategy had evolved since the preliminary hearing. Now she was arguing that even if my property technically predated the subdivision, I'd voluntarily submitted to HOA jurisdiction by paying dues and following other HOA rules. "Mr. Patterson can't have it both ways," she argued. "He can't accept the benefits of HOA membership while rejecting the obligations. If he wants to claim his property is exempt, he should stop paying dues and forfeit his access to all community amenities." Marcus countered in his opening. "The question before this court is simple. Does Mr. Patterson own the lakefront parcel described in his deed? If yes, then the HOA has no claim to it. Whether he pays dues or uses community roads is irrelevant to the question of ownership. The HOA is trying to confuse the issue because they know the facts aren't on their side." The trial lasted 3 days. Patricia called several witnesses, including Brenda, Dennis, and a former HOA president who testified about how the lakefront had always been treated as common area. Under cross-examination, Marcus got each of them to admit they'd never actually researched the property history or confirmed that my specific parcel was included in the subdivision. "You just assumed it was common area because it was near the lake?" Marcus asked Brenda. "It was a reasonable assumption," she said defensively. "All the other lakefront and shoreline estates is common area. But you never looked at Mr. Patterson's actual deed?" "I looked at the HOA covenants." "Which don't mention his specific parcel anywhere, do they?" Brenda's jaw clenched. "The covenants describe all lakefront as common area." "All lakefront within the shoreline estates subdivision, correct? And Mr. Patterson's property isn't part of that subdivision, is it?" "I disagree with that characterization." Marcus pulled out the 1952 plat. "Can you show me on this plat where Mr. Patterson's lakefront parcel appears?" Brenda studied it, her face reddening. "It's not specifically labeled, but because it's not on this plat at all, is it? Because it wasn't part of the 1952 subdivision. That doesn't mean he owns it." Marcus pulled out the chain of title documents. "These deeds, going back to 1937, all describe the same parcel, including lakefront access. Doesn't that establish ownership? The HOA has maintained this land for decades. What specific maintenance have you done on Mr. Patterson's parcel?" Marcus asked. "Have you mowed it, landscaped it, built anything on it?" Brenda hesitated. "It's been available for residents to use." That's not what I asked. What actual maintenance or improvements has the HOA made to this specific parcel? I'd have to check our records. Please do, we'll wait. Judge Castellano intervened. Ms. Whitmore, do you have knowledge of any specific maintenance the HOA has performed on the disputed parcel? Not off the top of my head, Your Honor. Then let's move on, the judge said, sounding unimpressed. When it was our turn to present evidence, Marcus called me to the stand first. I walked through the process of buying the house, reviewing the deed, discovering the property history. I explained how I'd researched the 1937 plat and the chain of title. Why is lakefront access important to you? Marcus asked. It's why I bought this specific house, I said. After my divorce, I wanted a fresh start somewhere peaceful. I'm an architect by training, so I appreciate good design and natural beauty. Having direct access to Lake Michigan was my dream. I paid significantly more for this property because of that lakefront parcel. Patricia's cross-examination tried to paint me as an entitled newcomer trying to steal community resources. You've only lived in Shoreline Estates for 6 months, correct? She asked. That's correct. And in that time, you've immediately tried to privatize land that other residents have enjoyed for decades? I haven't tried to privatize anything, I said calmly. I've simply exercised my property rights over land I legally own. Don't you think it's selfish to take that access away from your neighbors? My neighbors never had legal access to my private property. The fact that previous owners didn't build a dock doesn't mean the land was public. If someone doesn't use their backyard for 20 years, that doesn't mean it stops being theirs. Patricia tried a few more angles but couldn't shake my testimony. I'd done my homework and I knew the facts cold. Our surveyor and title expert testified again, providing the same clear evidence of ownership they'd presented at the preliminary hearing. Marcus also called a real estate appraiser, who testified that the lakefront parcel added approximately $150,000 to my property's value, which is exactly what I'd paid extra for it. If this parcel were actually common area, as the HOA claims, then Mr. Patterson has been defrauded, Marcus argued. He paid a premium price for lakefront access that he supposedly didn't own. Either he owns it, as his deed states, or someone owes him $150,000. Patricia's closing argument emphasized the importance of HOA rules and community standards. If we allow individual property owners to simply ignore HOA covenants whenever it suits them, the entire concept of planned communities falls apart. Rules matter. Community agreements matter. Mr. Patterson can't be allowed to pick and choose which rules he follows. Marcus's closing was more direct. This case is about property rights, plain and simple. Mr. Patterson owns a parcel of land. It's described in his deed. It's been described in every deed for that property since 1937. The HOA's covenants don't apply to it because it was never part of their subdivision. The judge already ruled on this at the preliminary hearing. Nothing the HOA has presented at trial changes those fundamental facts. Mr. Patterson should prevail, and the HOA should pay his attorney's fees for forcing him to defend his clear legal rights. Judge Castellano took the case under advisement and said he'd issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt longer than the entire previous summer. I tried to focus on work, taking on a new design project for a client in Grand Rapids, but my mind kept drifting to the case. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, Marcus called. We won. Complete victory. Judge Castellano ruled that you have clear title to the lakefront parcel, and the HOA has no claim to it whatsoever. He also awarded attorney's fees, finding that the HOA's lawsuit was without merit and was pursued unreasonably. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. How much are the fees? $42,000. That should make the HOA think twice before filing frivolous lawsuits in the future. Will they appeal? They could, but Judge Castellano's ruling is thorough and well-reasoned. An appeals court would almost certainly uphold it, and if they lose on appeal, they'd owe even more money. I thanked Marcus profusely, hung up, and walked down to my dock. The fall colors were just starting to show in the trees along the shore. I sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling over the water, and felt genuinely at peace for the first time since that morning when Brenda had confronted me. The HOA's response came quickly. 3 days after Judge Castellano's ruling, I received a formal letter from the board stating that they accepted the court's decision and would not appeal. They also announced a special assessment of $250 per household to cover the legal fees they owed me. The reaction from the neighborhood was immediate. Angry residents flooded the next HOA meeting, demanding to know why the board had wasted $42,000 of community funds on a losing lawsuit. Carol later told me what happened. It was brutal. People were furious. Someone made a motion to recall Brenda from the board immediately. It passed almost unanimously. Dennis resigned on the spot. Linda tried to defend them but ended up stepping down too. Who's running things now? I asked. Me, Timothy, and 3 new interim board members. We're having elections next month to fill the positions properly. And we're reviewing all of the HOA's policies to make sure we're not overstepping our authority anywhere else. The November elections brought in a completely new board, except for Carol and Timothy, who both kept their positions. The new president was Jim Kowalski, the older neighbor who'd lived in Shoreline Estates since the 60s. Jim's first act as president was to send a formal letter of apology to me. The board regrets the unnecessary conflict over your property and acknowledges that the lawsuit should never have been filed. We hope to move forward with a more collaborative and legally sound approach to community governance. I appreciated the gesture. More than that, I appreciated the return to normalcy. I spent the winter months working on interior renovations to my house, planning a boathouse for the next summer, and actually getting to know my neighbors. Mike and Jennifer invited me to a holiday party in December. Most of the neighborhood was there, and people were friendly and welcoming. Several apologized for not speaking up sooner about Brenda's behavior. We should have said something when she went after you, one neighbor admitted. But it's easier to keep your head down and avoid conflict. You stood up to her, and it made the whole neighborhood better. In January, I ran into Brenda at the grocery store in St. Joseph. She was in the produce section, carefully selecting apples. I almost turned around to avoid her, but then decided that was childish. "Hello, Brenda," I said. She looked up, startled. For a moment, I thought she might just walk away, but instead she took a breath and faced me. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I was wrong about your property. I should have researched it properly before making accusations." "I appreciate that," I said. "I thought I was protecting the community," she continued. "I've put 8 years into that HOA board, trying to maintain standards and property values. When you showed up with plans to build a private dock, I saw it as someone trying to take advantage of community resources. I didn't realize the land was actually yours." "Why did you keep fighting after the judge ruled against you at the preliminary hearing?" I asked. "You could have saved the HOA a lot of money by dropping it then." Brenda's face tightened. "Pride, I suppose. I hate being wrong. And I couldn't stand the idea of losing to someone who'd been in the neighborhood for 5 minutes. It was stupid. I cost the community $42,000 because I couldn't admit I'd made a mistake. That took guts to say," I admitted. "I resigned from the board. Did you hear?" "I did. For the best, probably. I'd become too controlling. My husband has been telling me that for years. Sometimes you need to lose badly to see what you've become." She paused, then added, "Your dock looks nice, by the way. I walk past it sometimes." "Thanks. You're welcome to use it if you ever want to. Bring a chair. Watch the sunset." Brenda looked surprised. "That's generous, considering." I shrugged. "Life's too short to hold grudges. Besides, I didn't buy lakefront property to enjoy it alone. We parted on surprisingly cordial terms. I never became close friends with Brenda, but we'd nod and exchange pleasantries when we saw each other around town. She took up gardening, I heard later, and became less involved in neighborhood politics. Spring came early that year. By March, I was back out on the dock, watching ice break up on the lake and planning my summer kayaking trips. I'd joined a local paddling club and made several new friends who shared my love of the water. The boathouse went up in May, a small structure at the end of my dock that matched the craftsman style of my house. I stored my kayak and paddle boards there, along with fishing gear I was learning to use. One Saturday morning in June, I was having coffee on the dock when Jim Kowalski walked up. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Not at all. Want some coffee?" "Sure." He settled into one of my Adirondack chairs and accepted the mug I offered. "Beautiful morning." "They're all beautiful out here," I agreed. "Listen, I wanted to thank you," Jim said. "What you did last year, standing up to Brenda and the old board, it changed things. We're running the HOA differently now. More transparencies, more respect for individual property rights. We're focusing on actual community needs instead of control for its own sake." "That's good to hear." "We're also working on updating the covenants, making sure they're clear, enforceable, and reasonable. Your case showed us that we'd been operating on assumptions instead of actual legal knowledge. That's dangerous." I nodded. "It almost cost me $150,000 worth of property, And it did cost the community $42,000 in legal fees. Expensive lesson, but necessary. Jim sipped his coffee. How's the architecture business going? Good. I just landed a project designing a new library in South Haven. Should keep me busy through the fall. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching boats pass by on the lake. This was what I'd wanted when I moved here. Community, but with respect for boundaries. Connection, but with room to breathe. You ever regret moving to Shoreline Estates? Jim asked. After all the drama, I thought about it. The lawsuit, the stress, the confrontations. Then I looked at the water sparkling in the morning sun, felt the breeze off the lake, heard the calls of gulls overhead. No, I said, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Jim smiled. Good, we're glad you're here. Over the next year, the neighborhood continued to improve under the new board. They organized community events that were actually fun. Dock parties, kayak races, bonfire nights on the beach. The focus shifted from rules and enforcement to building genuine community connections. I became friends with several neighbors, started dating a teacher named Lisa Reynolds who lived 3 streets over, and generally settled into the life I'd imagined when I first bought my lakefront property. The legal precedent from my case had unexpected ripples. Marcus told me that several other property owners in different neighborhoods around Michigan had contacted him after hearing about my situation. Turned out HOA overreach was a common problem, and my case provided a roadmap for pushing back against it. You've become something of a folk hero in property rights circles, Marcus joked during one of our occasional lunch meetings. The guy who pulled out a 1937 deed and beat the HOA. All I wanted was to build a dock, I said. That's how most important cases start. Someone just wants to do something reasonable with their own property, and the system gets in their way. Then they fight back, and the law evolves. Looking back now, from the perspective of someone who's been in Shoreline Estates for over 2 years, I realize the lawsuit was about more than just my lakefront parcel. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It was about doing your homework and knowing your rights. And it was about not letting bullies, even well-intentioned ones, push you around. The Craftsman house that I fell in love with has become a real home. I've refinished the hardwood floors, updated the kitchen while maintaining its vintage character, and built custom bookshelves in the living room for my architecture and design collection. The lakefront parcel that caused so much controversy is now my favorite part of the property. I use that dock almost every day from May through October. Sometimes I'm kayaking, sometimes fishing, sometimes just sitting and thinking. Lisa joins me often, and we've talked about her moving in, though we're taking things slow. Last summer, I hosted a big dock party for the neighborhood. 50 people showed up, including Jim, Carol, Timothy, Mike, and Jennifer, and dozens of others. We grilled burgers, the kids jumped off the dock into the lake, and someone brought a guitar for music as the sun set. Even Brenda came, surprisingly. She brought a homemade potato salad and stayed for a couple hours, chatting with people and seeming genuinely relaxed. At one point, she approached me. "This is nice," she said, gesturing at the party. "You've brought people together." "The dock helps," I agreed. "Turns out lakefront property is better when you share it with friends." "I'm sorry I tried to take it from you," she said quietly. "That was wrong. Water under the bridge," I said. "Or in this case, water under the dock." She actually laughed at that. The sun set over Lake Michigan in a spectacular display of orange and red, reflecting off the water and painting everyone in warm light. I stood on my dock, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, looking at the house I'd fought to fully enjoy, and felt profoundly grateful. Fighting the HOA had been stressful and expensive, but it taught me important lessons. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. Sometimes you have to do the research and know the facts. And sometimes, when you're clearly in the right, you have to be willing to take it all the way to the end, no matter how hard people push back. My 1937 deed, that yellowed piece of paper I'd found in the county recorder's office, had been the key to everything. It proved that history matters, that property rights matter, and that just because everyone assumes something is true doesn't make it so. The boathouse I'd built now houses 2 kayaks, 3 paddleboards, fishing gear, and a small sailboat I'd bought this spring. Lisa has her own kayak stored there too. We've explored miles of Michigan coastline together, discovering hidden coves and quiet beaches that you can only reach by water. My architecture practice continues to thrive. Word got around about my attention to detail and historical research skills, and I've developed a specialty in restoration projects for older homes. Turns out the same skills that helped me defeat the HOA also make me good at preserving architectural history. The Shoreline Estates HOA, meanwhile, has become a model for reasonable community governance. Jim and the new board established clear policies, transparent finances, and a respect for individual property rights. They focus on maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and handling the few genuinely necessary community functions. They don't try to micromanage people's lives. Property values in the neighborhood have actually gone up since the board changed. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a community that's well managed but not oppressive. Several real estate agents now specifically mention our reasonable HOA as a selling point. I still get occasional emails from people around the country who've heard about my case and are facing similar HOA disputes. I always tell them the same thing. Know your rights, do your research, and don't back down if you're in the right. Most HOAs will back off when confronted with clear evidence and someone willing to fight. On warm evenings, I like to sit on my dock with a drink and watch the sunset, often with Lisa beside me. Sometimes I think about that morning when Brenda confronted me, convinced she had the authority to control my property. I think about how close I came to just giving up, accepting her claim because fighting seemed too hard. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I drove to the county recorder's office and dug through old plat maps. I'm glad I stood up at that HOA meeting with my binder of evidence. I'm glad I hired Marcus and fought the lawsuit all the way through, because now I'm sitting on my own dock, on my own property, enjoying the lakefront access I paid for and legally own. The water laps gently against the pilings, the sun paints the sky in colors that never get old, and I'm home in a way that goes deeper than just owning a house. That 1937 deed didn't just win me a legal case. It won me the life I'd been dreaming about when I left Chicago and started over. It gave me peace, community, and a place where I truly belong. The dock, the boathouse, the kayaks, all of it represents more than just recreational amenities. They represent the principle that your property rights matter, that you don't have to accept someone else's version of reality when you know the truth, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand your ground. I've learned that HOAs can serve valuable purposes when they're run by reasonable people focused on genuine community needs. But I've also learned that any organization, given enough power and the wrong leadership, can become oppressive. The key is vigilance, knowledge, and the willingness to push back when necessary. My neighbors have learned something too. They've learned that they don't have to simply accept every HOA demand without question. They've learned to ask for documentation, to verify claims, to insist on transparency. The entire neighborhood is better for it. Lisa and I are talking about building a small deck on her property, maybe a fire pit for gatherings. She doesn't have lake access, but her backyard has beautiful mature oak trees that provide perfect shade. We're checking all the HOA rules carefully, of course, but the new board has been great about approving reasonable improvements. Jim is stepping down as HOA president next year. He's recommended Carol to replace him, and I think she'll do a great job. She's organized, fair-minded, and has no interest in controlling people's lives. Exactly what an HOA president should be. As for Brenda, she's apparently become an advocate for HOA reform. She's been speaking at community meetings around the county, sharing her story about how she let power go to her head and the expensive lesson it taught her. It's a remarkable transformation, and I respect her for it. The legal fees that the HOA had to pay me went into a fund I've named the Property Rights Defense Fund. I'm using it to help other homeowners who can't afford attorneys when facing similar HOA disputes. So far, I've helped 3 families in different parts of Michigan defend their property rights. Marcus handles the cases pro bono, and the fund covers filing fees and expenses. It feels good to turn something that started as a negative, Brenda's attempt to take my property, into something positive that helps others. That's really what this whole experience has taught me. You can't control what others do, but you can control how you respond and what you do with the outcome. My dock party has become an annual tradition. We held the second one last month, and over 70 people showed up. The Torres couple is expecting their first baby. Jim brought his grandkids. Carol came with her book club friends. Even some people from adjacent neighborhoods attended after hearing about it. We strung lights along the dock and the boathouse, set up grills on the lawn, and had a local band play acoustic music as the sun went down. Kids played in the shallow water while adults talked and laughed. It Was exactly the kind of community event that brings people together without any HOA mandate or enforcement. Someone asked me during the party if I'd ever considered running for the HOA board. I declined politely. I've learned that I'm better at standing up to power than wielding it. Let people like Carol and Jim do the administrative work. I'll focus on living my life, helping when I can, and being a good neighbor on my own terms. That's really what property rights are about. The ability to live your life on your own terms, within reasonable limits. My lakefront parcel gives me that freedom. I can kayak when I want, fish when I want, or just sit and watch the water when I need to think. The 1937 deed that established all of this sits framed on my office wall now, a reminder of where I came from and what I fought for. Edward Pritchard, the man who originally developed these lakefront estates during the Depression, probably never imagined his careful documentation would matter 90 years later. But it did. His attention to detail, his proper recording of deeds and plats, gave me the evidence I needed to defend my property rights. It makes me think about the choices we make and how they echo forward through time. Edward Pritchard built quality homes and documented everything properly. Dorothy Kimball maintained the house for 60 years and paid her taxes faithfully, preserving the property's integrity. And now I'm continuing that legacy, protecting what's been passed down and hopefully making it even better for whoever comes next. I've started documenting the property's history more thoroughly, collecting old photographs, talking to longtime residents about what they remember, researching the architectural details of the house. Someday I'll pass all of that on to the next owner, giving them the same gift of knowledge that helped me defend what's mine. Lisa thinks I should write a book about the whole experience. Maybe I will, someday. For now, I'm content to live it, to enjoy what I fought for, and to help others when they face similar challenges. The lesson I want people to take from my story is simple. Your property rights matter. Documentation matters. History matters. And when someone tries to take what's legally yours, you have every right to fight back. Don't be intimidated by official-sounding boards or threatening letters from attorneys. Do your research, know your facts, and stand your ground. That 1937 deed ended the HOA's claim to my lakefront parcel, but it did more than that. It ended my uncertainty about whether I'd made the right choice buying this property. It ended my doubts about whether I could stand up to institutional power. And it ended any question about whether I belonged in this community. Now, sitting on my dock on a perfect summer evening, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan with the woman I love beside me, and friends gathering on the lawn behind us, I know with absolute certainty that I made the right choice. Every difficult moment of that legal battle was worth it to secure this peace, this place, this life. The water reflects the fading light in shades of gold and amber. A sailboat glides past, silhouetted against the sunset. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids are playing, laughing with that carefree abandon that summer evenings bring. The smell of grilling food drifts on the breeze. This is what I fought for. This is what that old deed preserved. This is home, and no HOA, no matter how convinced they are of their authority, can take that away from me. Because I have something more powerful than their assumptions or their covenants or their threats. I have the truth, documented in black and white, recorded in the public record, undeniable and permanent. I pulled that 1937 deed, and it ended their claim once and for all. More importantly, it secured my future and proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is simply knowing the truth and being willing to defend it. That's the real ending to this story. Not the court ruling or the apologies or even the dock party celebrations. The real ending is sitting here in peace, knowing that what I have is truly mine, earned through patience, research, and the courage to fight for what's right. The sun dips below the horizon, leaving streaks of purple and pink across the sky. Lisa squeezes my hand. Tomorrow we'll kayak down the coast, explore new inlets, maybe find a quiet beach for a picnic. But tonight we'll stay right here, on my dock, on my property, watching stars come out over Lake Michigan. And that's exactly where I want to be.